Okay, it's time to begin. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Am I on? Yeah. Hello, hello. Please come and find your pew, find your place. There are tickets underneath the pew. If you pick the right one, you win $100. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Hey, do you have my mic on? I don't hear it. Do y'all need to turn it up a little bit, maybe? It's all the way up.
See, your voice is not as strong as mine.
I just don't want to be obnoxious, okay? Okay, we're in Luke chapter 6. We were talking about loving your enemies and all that, and a lot of questions were asked about the application. And I think there's probably four contexts in which to study how a Christian should behave in certain situations. What Jesus is addressing is our personal interaction or interpersonal relationships that we have around and how we navigate, in culture. And I don't think what he says has the broad application when we talk about war or protecting someone like your family and an intruder. I think those are different contexts, and we'd have to go, I think, beyond what Jesus is saying here in Luke to answer some of those questions, like going to Romans 13 or even capital punishment. I think, in my judgment, is up to the state, and God allows that. And if I were a Christian, I would not. If I were in the role of pulling the switch, I wouldn't have a problem doing it. I wouldn't think I'd be sinning. I wouldn't like it necessarily, but it is the role of the government to set up its rules and regulations. And so I think there's different contexts in which you would need to study and consider the various applications on how a Christian will respond. But I think there is a danger sometimes, in my judgment, of taking something that's said in a certain context and then making it apply in a broader area in different kinds of context. We have to be sure that we're interpreting the context out of which these things are said. And so Jesus is not addressing capital punishment. He's not addressing us defending our families. He's not addressing going to war. What he's addressing is how we behave in our culture in face of even hostility. I mean, it's up to me. If I'm being persecuted for my faith, then the Bible does teach that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, that's sort of confirmation of who we are and our identity and our loyalty to Jesus, and I might be killed for it, give my life. But that's a little bit different than saying to someone who breaks into my house, well, okay, I give my life, and also you can kill my family, along that line. I think that's a little bit different context that we would have to consider other principles and things that are involved. So anyway, I didn't want to leave it too ambiguous because, we have lots of questions of things like that come up. And we always have to be careful about the context out of which we interpret and make application. And if it is to be applied broadly, I think we would see it in principle. I mean, in principle, we are for life. I mean, that's the principle. But there are, in Romans 13, the sword is with the government. And that would be both, to me, concerning justice and punishment and defending the country or the empire or whatever. God used nations in the past, to go to war against various things. And I know it's the Christian age, but the principles, thou shalt not murder, it should be thou shalt not murder. We know it as thou shalt not kill, but it's sinister. It's murders, taking the life of somebody in a vicious and violent way. That's what that prohibition is in the Ten Commandments. It doesn't indicate all killing, because even in the Old Testament, when the Ten Commandments were given, there were certain death penalties for certain crimes. So it can't be, a prohibition to all that would fall in that category in killing. So we have to judge the context. And I think what Jesus is indicating and what he emphasizes is our interaction and understand who we are and align with Christ. He's trying to get us to be people who don't hate people. Don't treat people in evil ways or in ways that are reactive in kind. We're better than that. We're different kinds of people in the sense that we have a sense of direction because of Jesus. And so that's why I turn my cheek if I'm slapped. I don't retaliate. I trust in God. I put things in His hands to deal out the vengeance of my personal animosities. I don't take my revenge on people. That's what Jesus is teaching, which is quite different than the way it was back then and the way it is now. Today it's even escalating in interpersonal relationships. Now they're solved by guns. Whereas used to, you'd say, okay, I'll meet you in the back alley and we'll fight over it. But you can't. That's not done anymore. It's more violent. It's been escalated. And I think that's the context in which Jesus would be saying to pursue reconciliation with your enemy, to be one who doesn't react in kind but changes the paradigm, one who is showing patience and kindness to one who is, not patient and kind. It's just the Christian way. We live under a different regulation, principle, and law. So I just wanted to say that before we moved on to another knotty problem. Any questions on that? Yes.
Acts 21 and chapter 23, Paul utilizes Roman protection.
Yeah, he does.
For a mob, potential mob situation, and to protect his life. Mm-hmm. So those soldiers would be, because he was Roman citizen, they would lay down their lives for him.
Yeah. Yeah, several times Paul would call in, say he's a Roman citizen in order to evoke or to, put in place certain, citizenship freedoms or legalities that he had available to him. I remember one time when he's in prison and they wanted to get him out kind of secretly, and he said, no, you come and get me and take me out. He wanted it to be a public thing of rebuke of what these people did because he was a Roman citizen. So we don't live in the kind of era, time period that the people that Jesus is addressing is living in. But there are similarities in regard to our relationship to the authorities, to one another, and just people in general. We need to work on people in general, which is where the emphasis is. So for my personal view, one who serves in the military or one who even serves in the government in the execution of a criminal, all of that to me is legitimate under God's law, because it is not a murder. It is not a killing in the sense of how the Old Testament prohibits it. It is the execution of justice towards somebody. And, the Old Testament is filled with that. I know we're in the New Testament, but the principles are the same in many respects of judgment and punishment. So I know there's a lot of people that have different views in regard to that. But I don't know what to say, but my perspective on it. And I think this is not applicable per se in the same kind of context as warfare or an intruder in your house. That's much different than what Jesus is speaking of in this context, in which he's encouraging people to be not reactive and kind. He's illustrating what it is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you in an interpersonal relationship. So anyway, if you have any questions, some more specific things, once you write them down and give them to me, and I'll be happy to address them in a full class or sermon or something like that. I think we still have the question box out front, so maybe this has stimulated some things. I can deal with it more deeply if that is a concern of yours. Okay, chapter 6, we're going to move to, he's talked about love your enemies, and then he goes to judging others, and here he introduces a concept of, or the principle of hypocrisy. It's really amazing how hypocritical people are, if you think about it, even ourselves. We talk about loving others and doing kind things, but you have someone who harms us anyway, or whatever, whether it's minor or major. Okay, we're quick to put our Christianity back, and say, I'm justified, or we rationalize a certain behavior or response that may be ungodly, but that's somewhat what it's like to be human, because we're always fighting that initial impulse. Jesus is not wanting us to act on impulse of our feelings. It's like, be angry, but do what? Sin not. Okay, well, how many times have we gotten angry, but we sinned in that anger by what we said to others, or maybe our actions that we've done? God recognizes that we have emotions. We have feelings. Our feelings get hurt. We get, scarred emotions by various things. And what God is expecting of his people is to leverage, and I know this is hard, is to leverage good in dealing with evil. So you have the statement, if your enemy is hungry, what do? But he's your enemy. But he hurt me. But he said something ugly. He borrowed something from me, never turned it back, or broke it. It was a bad business deal. How many things can you think of that would fall in the category enemy? But he says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. In other words, it is an inroad to heart change. Sometimes we have to think about that. People, unless their conscience is seared, that is, their heart is so hardened that it's impenetrable, most people do have, little bit of conscience in them. I know the conscience has to be trained, but there is this oughtness that people have. And I think one of the things to understand about the power of goodness is that it sparks or it ignites the conscience. If you feed your enemy and they know that they've done you wrong, and here you are not responding in kind, the Hatfields and McCoys, you're not responding in kind, but you do something that's altogether unexpected, what kind of impact would that have on that individual? Do you not think that it would have an impact? Yeah. Yes, you may. Take 2 steps forward. Yeah. Yeah. Changed her whole attitude. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it, it that happens in our interpersonal relationship. I remember a student, one of my graduate students last year. He was in my class, and he just um, railed me about the class. We were experimenting with an 8-week class, and so you got 16 weeks of study into 8 weeks. You can imagine how the labor of time in that particular thing. But he was just so upset. He demanded to talk to me, and so I did a conference, video conference with him online. He was a graduate student. We talked, and I let him vent and everything, and try to smooth things out with him. Told him, about the class. I warned y'all that it would be an accelerated, intensive class. Yeah, but you're not. He was just very ugly about it. You know what? He's one of my fans now. He takes every class I teach, and afterwards he said he admitted in his evaluation that he was upset at first, but because of the intensity and what I made them do, he wrote the longest paper he had ever written, research paper, and did so much that he had never thought he'd be able to do. And so it kind of turned around. And I think one of the reasons is, I let him vent, and I complimented him on his work and all this stuff, and he just can't get enough of my teaching now. I mean, I don't know what happened. You see what I'm saying? Not that anything changed about me. It was all about his attitude. And David's had those experiences too.
Yeah, all of us teachers are complaining about that 8-week 4
Yeah, I love them. But it's how we behave. It's the same thing. It's how you behave when things aren't going right at the restaurant. When you think you have a right and you start exercising your right, and you start getting ugly, and you say things, and then all of a sudden you're mean to the waitress or the server and all that, or someone cuts you, on the road, and I have people. Of course, I don't know what happens, but I must be one of the ones that cut people off or something. I don't know, but I get honked at. But I have people that cut in front of me and stuff like that, and they just, and I don't know. I don't do that. I don't sit there and hang on my horn. It happens. I think all Jesus is trying to get us to do is to think about your behavior in your sphere of life and whatever you do. What do you yell out when you hit your thumb with a hammer? And you have your employees all around you. How are you when you get upset? You just turn into a different person and all mean and start punching walls and tearing up things, stuff. We need to grow out of that kind of habits, our go-tos. That's what Christianity does, is sort of training us in righteousness, right? So this is how relevant, I think, the teachings of Jesus, and particularly this one. Judge not, and you will be not judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. What's fascinating about this is that how we behave, or I should say it this way, the action of God toward us is predicated on how we act toward others. Think about that. How about if you want more forgiveness from God? Perhaps we ought to do what? Forgive more. If we want God to be more merciful with us, then we ought to be maybe a little bit more merciful with others around us. You see the connection? So this is not condemning all judgment. We make judgments. Our culture uses the word judgment in a very sinister way. Okay, it's kind of like you can't say or evaluate anything. We find this in school where we have. I've taught preachers and stuff in regard to doctrinal things, and they're afraid to take a stand on something, because of how some may react. I'm going, what's your deal? He said, well, I don't want to be perceived as being judgmental. I said, that's not judgmental. Teaching the truth is not judgmental. Judgmentalism is the idea of arrogance. You're better than everybody else. Now, the culture will make you think that's your attitude when you're a Christian. You think you're better than everybody else. No, we don't. They don't know us. We don't think we're better than anybody else. We believe that we were lost and we were saved. But to identify something as right and wrong is not judgmental. It's judgmental. It's the hypocrisy of judgmentalism that Jesus is attacking. What are you saying, Mark?
I think that it also goes to the thing that culture right now, people wear their feelings on their sleeve.
Yeah.
You can't give them honest feedback. My kids were
Unless you have a place for them to go and cry after you give it. A safe place.
okay, and different people are going to deliver this to you different ways. You can't get your feelings hurt, but we also, the people that are delivering this, they're not judging you if they're not trying to ascertain your motivation.
Yeah.
Okay? If they're just giving you true feedback as to what you did, and they're offering it in a way they're trying to help. Some old people, they scream and yell, and they're still offering it in the right way. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like it. It sounds like you're being screamed and yelled out about something you did. But they're giving you feedback. How you use it's up to you.
Yeah.
But you can't. It's the motivation part, and to me, it's partly also empathy versus sympathy, because you can have empathy with somebody that's been circumstances that you've been through yourself, or you can take the circumstances you've been through and adapt them to the situation and still have empathy for others. But a lot of people don't. They pity them and they're going, I'm glad I'm not like this.
Right. It's comparison type things. Yeah.
I just think it's the society in general has moved away from being able to have that
Right.
candid discussion.
Yeah. Dallas.
I think oftentimes we lose. This is one of the most misquoted verses
Oh, yeah.
in the Bible. I think what we miss as Christians sometimes, like you talked about, is the arrogance factor and humility. Judge not that you be not judged. Jesus approached the woman that was brought to him
Mhm.
with acts of adultery. Neither do I continue. Go your way.
Sin no more.
He had a judgment for her, but it was delivered in such a way that was different.
Yeah, we can come across as judgmental. Yeah.
But the way he approached the Pharisees
Yeah.
was completely different.
Yeah.
But he was still judging
Uh-huh.
according to what most people would consider judging.
Yeah.
He was still judging them and giving them. We have to ascertain, like the Lord said, we have to ascertain situations what that means. Sometimes I think we err on the side of telling people what they're supposed to do instead of presenting people with the truth and letting
Them decide. Yeah.
for themselves. We can't make anybody believe and be baptized in that plan of salvation. We can't make anybody do that, right? The same way we can't make anybody believe other teachings in the Bible, whether that's divorce and remarriage, the book of Revelation, whatever it may be, some of these controversial ideas. We're not going to make anybody believe those. We can present those in love and show people through logic and reasoning and present them with the truth. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
it's our approach all the time.
Yeah, our approach is very important in how we come across. I mean, I've been, there's been times when I've been accused of certain things, and I'm just blown away. But then, I go away and thinking, why did that person think that way about me? It could be how I approached or my demeanor. But oftentimes, the way it is in culture is any disagreement you might have with someone, you're judging them. And for me to say that I'm a member of the Church of Christ, people will automatically think that you're judging others. And I would say, well, you're doing the same thing because of what you believe. It's really comical if you think about it rationally, But that is the catch thing. You can't. It's moved to where judgment about one's lifestyle or anything. You can't say anything because now you're not inclusive. They want us to affirm and all this kind of nonsense. And so there's no right or wrong. But if you make that stance, it's kind of difficult. I'm just waiting for the day that even it creeps in our Christian school. I hope it doesn't. I'm sure it won't. But we've said a lot of things. This would never happen. They make me say pronouns for certain people. A man who identifies as a girl or a woman wants me to use her, or she. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to play the game that they're wanting us to play. But see, I will be considered what? Judgmental in doing that. Yes. Somebody else said something? Oh.
It's also situational,
Yes.
because the way that you can have a discussion with people without judging them is also dependent on the relationship you have.
Exactly.
Talking to a stranger
Yeah.
can be the same conversation you have if you have somebody that you care about and have an established relationship with. And in discussion, though, you can't avoid difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part of it. If somebody comes to you with something, then you got to be tactful about it, but you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
Because like with your children and stuff, and with people you care about, there's going to be times that you're going to have difficult conversations. A stranger, it's going to be a different conversation. So it's also situational how you do it and how you do it.
Now, culture will use this passage to try to convince us not to make evaluations. That you're violating your own scripture. I've heard them say that a lot, and they're misunderstanding. Where is it in John 4 where he says, "Judge righteous judgment"? And we have to judge between good and evil, and even the finer details of what's expedient and not expedient. So there is critical evaluation of things. And this is one of the things our culture has lost. When we get students at Wagner, they have no critical evaluative abilities. They can't look at something and form a critical, what's wrong with this? Analyze it. Yeah, it's just amazing. And so everything goes. It's the hesitation of saying anything because you don't want to be perceived as judgmental. But that's, it does. Mm-hmm.
People don't like to feel in some way that they're not measuring up. But God's standard is perfection. You don't measure up.
Mm-hmm.
And so people dislike that discomfort, mental discomfort of the idea that maybe I don't meet the standard, whatever that may be. And so that's why they're trying to quash all judgment.
Well, not also in regard to that is who are you to say anything because you're not perfect, Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As we read down, we'll discuss, and that's a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we are presenting the truth, we should have to guard against hypocrisy.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, the counter to judge not is what? What's the next thing that's listed? He says, give. He says, give. Now think about that. You suppose the juxtaposition of these two things, do not judge, but then he says give. You got a negative and then you got a positive. Do you think they correlate anyway? You think that this might be the answer to judgmentalism? If you look as to how you might what? Help, assist, give to the other. So it kind of refocuses when one is judgmental, what are they doing? They're comparing maybe themselves to the other. I'm better than you, or you're not, whatever. But if you have the attitude of giving, what are you doing to assess the situation? What do you need? Right? How can I help you? That's a little bit different, isn't it? So it's kind of like an opposite approach and attitude. So do not judge, but then he says, give, and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap, for with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you again. And this is true negatively and positively. If you're judgmental, then that's what you're going to get from others, right? Judgmentalism. They're going to be talking about you. Oh, you think you're whatever. Well, they're judging you now. So you get the same in kind. But if you have a different path, a different guiding principle, that you are one who gives, and it's not always talking about when giving money, it's giving other things. It's giving encouragement instead of the hypocritical judgmentalism. Yes, you're evaluating who they are. You're treating them as people, decent people. You're, there's, yeah.
And that's what people, a lot of times you'll pull back because you're afraid, they don't necessarily say loser, but you feel like it's a transaction that's going on. And if you give more than somebody else, then you're missing something in the transaction.
Yeah.
And I think he's saying, don't be afraid.
Don't worry about, don't worry about getting, just give, and it will be given to you. The world gives you back more than what you give it. Seems to be the principle. I like the in your lap. The word there is the idea of a folded garment. You have back then their robe, and they would put it where there's a little flap right here, and they would get the grain or whatever, and it'd be poured into their lap. That's sort of the image that we're looking at. Yes.
B.B. Black used to talk about giving money.
Yeah.
And he'd say, who are the they in that verse?
Yeah.
I don't know who the they are. It just says they will give you.
Yeah. Who are the they?
Unexpected sources,
Yeah. And they're plural. Who are the they? That's interesting to think about. This doing this way or having this attitude is one trusting in God. It's following God's guidance instead of our own, following our feelings or our hurts or the way we might look at some people or enemies and think this is totally opposite. So Jesus is giving an alternative, but it is of faith. You have to trust. And in order to experience the principle, you have to employ it in life, right? It's one thing. I think this is what's neat about Scripture is we have these things, casting all your care upon Him, and there's other things that relate to our joy and our peace and stuff like that. And they are promises and they are principles, spiritual principles, but you're not going to experience that unless you actually put it into practice. And the hesitancy is putting into practice. That's the difficult part. But once you cross that and test it and do it, I think we're all amazed as to what the response and how it works in our life and the lives of others. Yeah, I mean, you have all the, yeah, angry is, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we're judging, yeah. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting how um, sometimes you wish that Jesus and the Bible would get more specific on things, right? But the principles are the principles, and we are to work it out. There's some measure of us um, employing these things in our own personal lives instead of Him telling us, every situation, do this. He gives us principles. It's like the principle of giving. There's not an amount; it's just a principle. And so you gotta struggle with that and how that would apply. Yes, David.
Anger is such an easy emotion to give into, and if you cultivate it, it becomes easier and easier and easier to go there. And so I see that a lot just in out and about with young families, that they will give in to their anger with their kids,
Yeah.
or they'll give in to anger like Dallas is pointing out at restaurants, or they'll give in to anger with their friends, and that's the reason why you see so much violence. One of the reasons why you see so much violence in our society is because we're so easy to give over to that emotion.
Yeah.
And if you keep on cultivating it, it can even go into explosive rage.
Yeah.
Blackout anger is what I tell my students. Don't get into blackout anger. And when I mention to them, do you know of anybody who's actually blacked out when they get mad? I'll say several of them nodding their heads. Well, they have done it themselves.
Yeah.
They get so angry they forget what they said, they forget what they did. That is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and just like our society is just escalating in regard to that. Now, he says if you give, the promise is that you'll receive in kind. So he's giving us the promise or the blessing or the result by behaving God's way instead of the human way of doing things. And so I like the shaking together. This has to do with getting the when you buy something back then, they put it on a scale and whatever, and it's nice to have someone that gives you fair amount. I was in the grocery store and was getting some drinks, and all of a sudden we started seeing these little bitty cartons now. What is this, man? But the grocery stores, because of inflation and stuff, are shrinking some of their products. Same price, but now it's just you don't get as much. But the idea is, you're getting your lap's worth, but not only that, it's just kind of like you're buckling under the weight of what's being given to you, more than enough. So that's the result of following God's way. Just trust it, put it into practice, and live it that way. Now, in order to illustrate this, there's two illustrations on hypocrisy. He says, for no good tree bears bad fruit. I'm sorry. He also told him a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into the pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who he is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log, which would be better beam? This is not a 2x4. I know some illustrations. It's represents a beam or trunk of a tree, log that is in your own eye. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck, a little piece of sawdust, in your eye. You got this big thing, it's comical. People must have laughed at this, had to laugh. We read it so seriously, we don't get it, but it had to be a humorous, illustration when Jesus was telling it. But a speck that is in your own eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your eye, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. So see, this is the illustration about judgmentalism that he's just illustrated here. And it's hypocrisy because you're the one who's judging others, but you have, everybody's got this sawdust in their eyes, and you're walking around with this big trunk, looking around, people, it's so obvious to everybody else of how in error or arrogance or who you are, and yet you're the one that's trying to correct people or judging people. It's this hypocrisy. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, well, that's natural that they always say that.
There's got to be some truth in that.
Yeah, probably.
This is one of the things that scares me the most in my Christian walk. I want to make sure I am not,
Mhm.
because it is probably the number one attractor for people to worship, interest in Christianity.
I think it's used a lot of times as an excuse for them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it is true that when we are hypocritical, people see that, know it, it's obvious to them. And if they know where you go, and everything, then those are things we have to overcome. So think about our lives. How are we on social media? How are we on, other things? Are we representing Christ in the right way? Yeah.
I mean, for some reason, every time a crime happens and they're affiliated with the Church of Christ, I hate to say that like front page, but it gets put on the front page.
Yeah.
The guy that was most recently executed, he was involved with a preacher in the Church of
Yeah, I
Christ.
know. Yeah.
And for some reason, it always makes the news. And I think this is something that we all should take very seriously. And this isn't I think like you're saying too, we can't take it so far and say that we can't ever teach anybody the truth with authority. That's far from what I'm saying. But this requires careful self-examination to make sure when you're approaching someone that you're trying to make sure that your flaws,
Yeah.
your values are aligning with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because if I go out and tell everybody, hey, you don't need to gamble,
And then you're seen at the casino really into it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's got to be some consistency. There's some consistency that we need to have. Yes, for sure. But also, much of the time, it's an excuse that people use against religious people in general. So the best way to overcome that kind of thing, of course, is relationships with people. Yes.
the case that Dallas refers to, Charles Sennett was the preacher, and he held two gospel meetings at the congregation where I was preaching right during college, right after college. And the congregation, he had baptized several of the members of that church.
Mhm.
And so when all this happened and the tragedy, well, I say tragedy, as the end came, there were members of the church there, New Hope, that questioned their own baptism
Yeah.
because what life he'd been leading,
Yeah.
no one picked up on it. I thought I knew him, and we didn't know him. But
Yeah.
the thing is about this passage, Jesus doesn't condemn plucking out that speck out of your
Right.
eye.
Right.
He just say make sure your own
Yeah.
life is clean.
Yeah, we start with us first, right? And that's important. I think we're about out of time. But he calls it a hypocrite when we practice judgmentalism, and there's no consideration that we might be doing the same thing that we condemn others of doing. So we'll start with verse 43 next time. Thank you. Good comments. Appreciate it. Terry, you're awfully quiet this morning.
Well, I had a lot of things I could say.